Mary Celeste is really one of the great mysteries of the sea, but it's often sort of perceived as an Anglo-American mystery. The Americans love their conspiracy theories, the British love their mysteries, and its Canadian and Nova Scotian connections are really frequently forgotten.
Mary Celeste was cleared to leave the port of New York with a cargo of industrial alcohol on November the 4th, 1872, and did in fact leave the port a few days later. On board were Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife and child, and a crew of 7, which was all the complement required to make a transatlantic voyage. A month later, on December 4th, Mary Celeste was found drifting near the island of Santa Maria in the eastern Azores. The vessel had been drifting for some time and in fact had traveled approximately 380 miles from her last recorded position. The vessel that found the Mary Celeste was the Dei Gratia, built in Nova Scotia. Her master was David Morehouse. Captain Morehouse sent his first mate, Oliver Deveau, to board the Mary Celeste. And Deveau found the vessel apparently abandoned, nobody on board. Sails were still set, but her boat was missing. Oliver Deveau and 2 crew members from Dei Gratia went on board Mary Celeste and brought her into Gibraltar, brought her before the Court of Vice Admiralty there, hoping for a rich reward for the salvage work they had done. Officials at Gibraltar were suspicious given the circumstances around the vessel's abandonment. Nevertheless, the court proceedings found no evidence of foul play involved with the vessel. Despite this, they were awarded a small fraction of the vessel's worth. Abandoned vessels were common in the North Atlantic at this time for a variety of reasons. Overloading, poor maintenance, storm damage, fire, other hazards. In the last decades of the 19th century, there were more than 1,600 derelict vessels in the North Atlantic. Usually the fate of their crews was known. Frequently they were picked up by other vessels. But the mystery of Mary Celeste's abandonment has never been solved.
The
cultural fascination with Mary Celeste and her fate started early and has persisted for a very long time. I think the Court of Vice Admiralty proceedings themselves probably contributed to this by raising the possibility that something untoward had happened on board. The late 19th century was also a period during which mass media became pervasive in society. So the bare facts of the story were widely known from an early date. As, for example, in Arthur Conan Doyle's story, the narrative of J. Habakkuk Jephson, which was widely disseminated and provided a fictionalized account that was often taken for fact. This is also a period in which the world was becoming known in a much more extensive way, geographically speaking. So those areas of the world that remained anomalous or mysterious became objects of popular fascination in the late 19th century.
Why is this one ship so fascinating to us? It's just got a toehold in popular culture. I think one aspect that really I find compelling about Mary Celeste are those details when Oliver Deveau of the Dei Gratia steps aboard this ship and it's sailing by itself and there's not a soul aboard, but there's all these compelling details, the dent in the mattress where somebody was sleeping, and just you imagine yourself on the deck listening to the creaking of the rigging, the rattling of the plates in the cupboards of this ship sailing without a soul aboard. Even the ship's cat had disappeared and been scooped up. And I think that detailed sense of a ship with nobody aboard sailing by itself has really made it an enduring part of the mysteries of the sea.
Many theories have been advanced to account for Mary Celeste's abandonment at sea. Some of these have been quite otherworldly, but some of them quite plausible as well. Many people felt that there had been a mutiny on board, a mutiny or disorder related to the vessel's cargo of alcohol. Piracy has also been advanced as a possible explanation. There have also been natural explanations in the form of a seaquake. sea creatures or sea monsters. I think a more straightforward explanation rests in the character of the vessel's cargo, industrial alcohol. It seems likely to me that some of those on board became aware or concerned about the possibility of an explosion as the cargo volatilized, and that they put off in a boat with the hopes of allowing this danger to pass.
2 of the hatches had been lifted up, probably to vent. Carrying explosive liquids in this era was the great fear of carrying things like kerosene and oil, and there were many horror stories of ships bursting into flame or exploding. So it makes a lot of sense that they would have all piled into the ship's boat, waited for the ship to vent, and then unfortunately a squall came up and the ship pulled away from them and the line parted.
The ship essentially sailed on without them, leaving them in a small open boat in the middle of the North Atlantic.
That's the theory that many of the mariners at the time were sort of convinced that clearly it must have been a very hasty abandonment of the ship. Oliver Deveau, their first mate who stepped aboard, one detail that he always remarked upon was, the sailors left their pipes behind. Obviously, they were in a big hurry because no sailor would leave his pipe behind unless he was in a huge hurry. And I think that gives us a sense that they were really worried about a possible explosion and were just hoping to vent the ship, and then fate intervened.
The story of the Mary Celeste is one of the best known sagas of the sea, but her Nova Scotian origins are much less well known.
My name is William Sinclair Dewis, and my great-great-grandfather was Joshua Dewis, who built the Amazon, which was subsequently called the Mary Celeste. For the first 4 years of my life, I lived on the Dewis homestead property in Advocate, and I have a variety of papers and photographs relating to the family's shipbuilding and ship operation activities. The Dewis family bought property in Five Islands, Nova Scotia in 1811, and in 1815 Josh was born into the Dewis family. Subsequently, they moved up the way to Economy, Nova Scotia, where Joshua Dewis started building small boats which were used by the local farmers to transport their products to market. He built a larger vessel, a schooner, while living in Economy as well.
My name is David Reed, and I'm a great-great-grandson of George Reed, who was a farmer and also a business partner of Joshua Dewis when he built the Amazon. The Dewises and the Reeds were neighbors when they lived in the Economy area of Nova Scotia. Then in 1836, together, they bought land in West Advocate. By the time they arrived there was a Spicer family who was already well established in Spencer's Island. Being an isolated area, it's not surprising that these families became entwined through business deals and marriages.
When Joshua moved his family to Advocate in 1836-37, he became a businessman, a lumberman, and a farmer. In 1841, he bought property from his father in Advocate and sort of set up homesteading there. He and his wife Naomi had 7 children, one of which was Robert, who subsequently sailed on the Amazon and became a captain, a sea captain himself. By 1860, Joshua decided to turn his hand back to shipbuilding again, and he developed plans for building a brigantine in the Spencer's Island area.
The brigantine rig was a very versatile, medium-sized sailing craft. It had many advantages. Needed a small crew, so if you're trying to economize, a great choice. It was very versatile in terms of its winds, with the big square sails for long-distance voyages and the maneuverability of the fore and aft sail. You lost a bit because it's not as big as the big 3-masted barks or full-rigged ships. But the small size of the brigantine could also be an advantage because it could get you into small ports like in islands in the West Indies, or all those small ports in places like Italy and Sicily in the Mediterranean.
Joshua was well aware of the potential of the timber that grew along the shores of the Fundy. No doubt he approached his brother-in-law Jacob Spicer to join him in his venture. Jacob and his brother Isaac owned timberland that grew along the shores of Spencer's Island. In order to finance this project, Joshua sold shares. Shares holders included the brothers Jacob and Isaac Spicer, Joshua's father-in-law George Reed. There were 4 local businessmen, as well as a man by the name of Robert McClellan. Robert became the first captain of the Amazon. Joshua himself retained 16 of the 64 shares. He was the largest shareholder.
Spencer's Island and Advocate were small communities in the 1860s, but they had amassed enough capital from farming and logging to finance their own shipbuilding operations, and they had tremendous building sites on the wide beaches of the area and access to large realms of untapped timber. And this made them a real growth center in the 1860s and 70s for shipbuilding. It had blossomed earlier in the North Shore of Nova Scotia, but in the 1860s you see more and more of these Bay of Fundy ports getting into shipbuilding in a major way. A great combination of a very good building site and timber close at hand with local resources and skills created all of these shipyards in the Bay of Fundy in the 1860s.
By 1860, Joshua had made up his mind to build a brigantine in Spencer's Island. It was going to be built on the beach in Spencer's Island of local woods, birch, beech, maple, and spruce. And it was a little shy of 100 feet long, and it was launched in 1861. This vessel, the Amazon, was the first vessel built in Spencer's Island of about 30.
Nova Scotia played a pivotal role in the growth of the sailing fleets of the British Empire in the mid and late 19th century. We could build and operate ships much cheaper than British shipyards and ship owners. And that meant that Nova Scotian flag ships were really appearing in every port in the world as prime carriers for the biggest economic empire the world had ever seen. And that gave Nova Scotians a real presence on the global stage. And you can see the community of Spencer's Island in 1861 building their first square-rigged deep-sea ship, trying to get entry into this great global opportunity for Nova Scotians.
I helped build the Amazon. I served my first apprenticeship at sea aboard that vessel, was launched on board and served continually on board her for 2 years in foreign trades all the time.
George Spicer was the eldest son of Jacob and Mary. He was born in 1846 in his grandfather's house in West Advocate. At the age of 12, George started his career at sea. He became a cabin boy. When he was 15 years old, he was actually on the Amazon the day it was launched.
I sailed with the Amazon to 5 islands, where she was to be loaded with deals for London. There was nothing unusual about that ship. She went along very well. I did not get any farther than 5 islands that time, however, for I took sick and had to return home.
After lying at anchor a few days, she proceeded to the 5 Islands, Nova Scotia, under command of Captain Robert McClellan, when she was loaded with timber and deals for London. We sailed down the Bay of Fundy, but the captain being sick, we put into Quaco, New Brunswick. Here a doctor came on board and advised our return to Spencer's Island.
The captain was brought up to our house, where he passed away. He was sick only a few days. He was just a young man. We took his remains over to his home in Economy. I remember his young wife came down to the shore to see what was in the boat.
His wife, Mary Ann McClellan, inherited his shares in the Amazon. She sold these shares to 3 of the previous owners of the Amazon, Mr. Cox, Bigelow, and Pezant, for £58, 12 shillings, 3 pence.
In a few days more, we secured another captain, Jack Parker of Walton, Nova Scotia, and started on our voyage again, but put into Eastport, Maine for some reason I cannot recall. And on the way out of port ran into some fishing weirs in the Narrows, and then lay for some days before we finally proceeded on our course across the Atlantic. We got to London all right, discharged the cargo and loaded another for Lisbon, Portugal. On the way down the channel, we ran into an English brig in the Straits of Dover and sunk her quickly. This seemed to have been the climax of our mishaps, for from this on, all went smoothly.
One of the great romantic aspects to the Mary Celeste story is that she was a cursed ship from day one, and misfortune followed her everywhere. But after her one tragic first voyage in 1861, she actually had 6 years of prosperous, uneventful trading, where she was shuttling cargoes down to the West Indies, across to the British Isles, into the Mediterranean, making very well-paying voyages. And as one of her crew members mentioned, we made many voyages and absolutely nothing happened.
By 1865, the Amazon was giving good returns to its shareholders. Sadly, for George Reed, this is the year he died. But in his will, he made several references to the Amazon. I give and bequeath to my daughter, Margaret Ellen Reed, 1/16 of the brig Amazon, now at sea. George also made the same bequeath to his daughter, Elizabeth. George had hoped that the Amazon might provide some financial security to those girls. Unfortunately, the run of good luck of the Amazon was about to come to an end.
We finally brought a load of corn from Baltimore to Halifax. Halifax imported corn then. And I came home to see the folks after a voyage of 2 years and 3 months. A week later, the Amazon had gone to Cape Breton to load coal for New York.
Robert Dewis, along with a number of the other crewmen of the Amazon, left it when it arrived in Halifax.
The Captain Murphy took charge. He took her to Glace Bay to load coal. Anchoring in the harbor, a heavy gale came on and drove her ashore at the spot where an American company was digging out a dock. They bought the wreck and dug her off.
In 1867, after Amazon is driven ashore in Glace Bay, her original owners, have a bit of a dilemma. They have a ship that has paid for itself many times over, but there was a loophole in the insurance that wasn't going to pay for the damage, and they decided to cut their losses and sell the ship kind of cheap and move on to other ships they were building and financing. That left a bunch of speculators in Cape Breton with an opportunity, as often happens after shipwreck, to buy salvage goods and hope you can buy it cheap and sell it for more. And so she quickly undergoes, as a damaged hull, several sort of flips in ownership. Somehow word gets down to the United States, to shipbrokers there, that there is a sound hull that's going good and cheap in Glace Bay. And so some American shipping interests speculatively buy this hull and hire for the American registry to convert to sail under the American flag.
Joshua didn't build any more vessels in Spencer's Island, but did build 2 brigs and a bark here at the Red Rocks in Advocate. In addition, he was a shareholder in other vessels that were built in the Advocate area. In 1868, he bought property in Advocate, 750 acres, known as the Knowlton Farm, and this is the Dewis homestead behind us that Joshua built. And this property included woodlands as well as the Red Rock area where he built his shipyard, and it also included some marshlands. He lived out his days as a farmer and took on other responsibilities as well. He was the Commissioner of Sewers for the Marsh area as well as the Justice of the Peace for Cumberland County. In 1896, he passed away, and his wife followed him about 10 years later. Both are buried in the Advocate Cemetery.
By the time he was 22 years old, George Spicer became a master mariner, and he continued for the next 42 years navigating the globe as a well-respected sea captain. Robert Dewis also went on to become a successful sea captain.
Long after the vessel's abandonment, Mary Celeste remained an unlucky vessel and was perceived as such as well. She went through a number of owners and never made a whole lot of money. The vessel's somewhat ignominious end came in January of 1885, when she was filled with a basically worthless cargo and insured for a significant amount, and then was driven onto a reef, Rochelet Reef in Haiti, as part of an attempt to commit insurance fraud. The attempt was found out, and her unscrupulous captain was held to account for this attempt. But it was an ignominious end for a vessel that had a very checkered history.
And it's fundamentally a Nova Scotian and a Canadian story. The ship is built in Nova Scotia. It runs profitable years in service in Nova Scotia with Nova Scotian crews. And even after she's sold and goes on to her epic appointment with mystery, she's discovered by a Nova Scotian sailing ship and a Nova Scotian captain who brings the ship into port and then has to answer for all aspects of the mystery and conspiracy theory. So this the tale of Amazon Mary Celeste is a profoundly Canadian story that more Canadians should know about.